Jeez, I really did put some massive fandoms in the poll last time, huh? I wonder who even won. Oh, alright, so I'm doing the Creepypasta group of fandoms. That can't be too bad, right? I may as well just read some of the classics to jog my memory. No. Wait, are you kidding me? Alright, that just may be a one-time case. Let's try another. No! What kind of fandom am I getting myself into? Hello everyone, this is the RPG Monger, and welcome to the Fandom Files, the bi-weekly series where I take you into the deepest, darkest crypts within each and every fandom. I really did not know what I was getting myself into when I decided to cover the Creepypasta group of fandoms. Because while the whole Creepypasta craze of a few years ago has died down tremendously, the impact it left on the internet can still be seen today. And you did hear me right, the Creepypasta fandom is more of a unique situation, since it's actually comprised of multiple fandoms all surrounding specific stories like that of Jeff the Killer, for example. Though I'm sure some of you might be wondering, what even are creepypastas? To put it in simple terms, creepypastas are kind of like the internet's version of campfire horror stories. They can range from just something as simple as a spooky image that really isn't even that scary, why did this scare me years ago, to full-on stories that are copy and pasted throughout the internet. Thus, these creepy copypastas earned the name creepypastas. Now believe me, there are hundreds of creepypastas out there. Hell, for a while, it was actually a trend on YouTube to make fun of all the bad ones. It's really not an exaggeration to say that 90% of these read like rushed YouTube comments. Though among all the heaps of garbage, there were a certain few that really blew up across the community. Back in 2012, a year that really seemed to contain the heights of many fandoms, the creepypasta for Jeff the Killer was put onto the site, and oh boy, did that story develop a following. To be honest, what caught me off guard the most is how there's just a good chunk of the fandom that solely existed to romanticize these stories, to the point of sexualization, especially with Jeff the Killer because, you know, this is definitely the face of sex appeal. So before anything, I want to answer the question of why are so many creepypastas sexualized? Well, I believe it has to do with the fandom hopping phenomenon. Because while it's supposed to be a fandom surrounding spooky stories and ghastly tales, the amounts of ships, ship wars, and people wanting to engage in, let's just say 18+ activities with the characters from creepypastas, it reminds me a little bit too much of the Hetalia fandom, which kind of makes sense if you think about it. The years that the Creepypasta fandom developed this aspect of itself are the same years that the Hetalia fandom peaked. Because I'll tell you right now, just from what I've seen, half of these people aren't even sexualizing the original characters themselves. Rather, what they'll do is just implement that basic dark, edgy teen stereotype and make that the character they're romanticizing. At this point, they're barely even fans of the original story itself. It's really bizarre too, since while I can kind of see how Jeff could be turned into that cardboard cutout all these people use to push their sexual desires and fantasies on, I've seen them do it to all sorts of creepypastas. Even Ben Drowned. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that essentially fangirling over a dead child? I mean, I guess you do you, right? Well, now that we have that mess behind us, before we go on to quite possibly one of the most serious things I've ever seen in a fandom, I have two stories from the fandom that I'd like to share with you all. In fact, both of them are from one of you guys. For these stories, let's just call our protagonist Ben. Within the Creepypasta fandom, Ben had become pretty well known, since on Wattpad, they'd write reviews of creepypastas and their characters, basically analyzing the cliches found in most of them. After a while, the reviews were even beginning to gain popularity to their surprise. But with that popularity also meant it was under the radar of the rabid fans. And boy did they attack fast. Every day, Ben would wake up to 150 or more DMs from these lunatics with messages ranging from standard hate to full-on death threats like gutting you and offering your remains to Eyeless Jack. Sounds pretty dumb and extra, right? Well, with Ben not only being in 9th grade at the time, but also dealing with personal issues of their own, they ended up having to delete a solid portion of their reviews to keep the slime from making them feel even worse. However, unfortunately, that's not the last time Ben had to deal with garbage from the Creepypasta fandom. Ben is from South Africa, and at the time, there really weren't any people their age that were interested in things like horror movies or creepypastas. Though fortunately for Ben, there was one girl in their class who also enjoyed those kinds of things, and they'd talk about it for hours. But on one fateful day, when she found out that Ben had a completely different opinion than her regarding her favorite creepypasta, she became a completely different person. She would constantly demand to know why Ben didn't like Jeff the Killer and Laughing Jack, absolutely freaking out when he even tried to explain. And it only got worse, to the point where the girl actually threatened to cut Ben with a pair of scissors after an argument over the phone. Thankfully, she didn't go through with it, but the fact that Ben now had to fear being stabbed with scissors all because he didn't like the same creepypastas as some girl really is dumbfounding. Seriously, and this goes out to everyone watching this video right now. People will always disagree with you on something. That's just how life works. But never ever actually resort to threats and violence when faced with a disagreement or argument. It's honestly just the worst thing you can do. Well, alright, looks like I've put this one off long enough. In fact, odds are you may have even heard about this one on the news. So to start things out, let's talk about Slender Man. Quite possibly one of the most popular creepypastas to date, with the fandom surrounding it skyrocketing with the craze surrounding the game under the same name. At one point, you could not be on the internet without knowing what Slender Man was. Hell, the whole phenomenon originated from a Photoshop contest on the Something Awful forums. But unfortunately, while we all knew it was fake, some people didn't. On May 31st, 2014, two 12-year-olds lured their friend into a forest to stab them, all in their words to appease Slender Man and become his followers. Though by some miracle, the victim actually survived being stabbed 19 times, and after being found crawling out of the woods onto a sidewalk, she was rushed to the hospital just in time. So with this attack already being bewildering enough, how did the Creepypasta fandom react to it? Well, while there were some scumbags who were actually more worried about the state of the fandom than the actual girl who was barely alive in the hospital, thankfully not everyone was such an idiot. Along with the actual creator of Slender Man coming forward to express their utmost condolences for all those involved, members of the Creepypasta fandom even put together a 24-hour charity livestream on YouTube to raise money for the victim of the stabbing. Truly, if nothing did before, this shows that the majority of people within fandoms are just genuinely nice people. Since along with all of that, the girl received thousands of letters of support from all over the world. Considering that most of the fandom thankfully did the right thing when faced with this horrifying incident, the fact that it even happened really is a travesty. You know, it really is a shame that what started out as just a community of people who enjoyed horror stories ended up becoming something completely different, with many of the creators of popular creepypastas leaving the fandom out of disappointment or frustration. These terrible people really did end up draining the life force of what was once a healthy and positive community. Though now, with the vast majority of those people having moved on to other fandoms, what even remains of the Creepypasta fandom today, if anything? Well, in the year 2018, it's undeniable that the fandom is drastically smaller than what it once was, with many of the once popular stories fading into obscurity. But not all hope is lost, since with the r/NoSleep subreddit, this specific offshoot of the fandom lives on and really does reflect how the fandom was at its best. Though now, to start wrapping things up, I want to greatly express one thing. Creepypastas are not real. Any of these kinds of stories are just fiction. Nothing more, nothing less. I swear, I've actually gotten a story from someone whose girlfriend left them just because they didn't believe that creepypastas were real. Please, the sole purpose of these stories is to get a scare out of you, and that's that. Actually believing they're real and altering yourself because of it is quite possibly one of the worst mistakes you could ever make, and something you'll definitely regret in a few years. So take it from from me, the Spook Monger. Just enjoy the stories for what they are, and maybe discuss it with others. That's really all creepypastas and horror stories in general are meant for in the first place. Who knows, maybe you'll end up writing your very own one day. Though let's just hope that your characters aren't fangirled into oblivion. Phew. So there you have it. I'm not even joking. While I too used to read all of those popular creepypastas back in 2011 and 12, I really must have been lucky not to encounter any of these people. As always, I must thank all of you who have continued sending me your fandom stories via the DMs on Twitter. I'll keep doing my very best to feature all of your stories in upcoming videos. And as always, do leave your spookiest fandom stories from the Creepypasta Fandom in the comments below so I can in turn feature my favorite in the next episode of the Fandom Files. Here's my favorite from the last episode, and I'll probably have to skip ahead here a bit. Summer of 2016 was an insane year in the fandom, as I was finally able to attend more and more conventions, thus seeing more RWBY fans. But at the same time, I noticed that ship wars were getting way out of hand, as with every calm and collective batch of fans, there's always another batch of people willing to go headhunting for the sake of their beloved ship. Some people went as far as to say that even the music used in RWBY was meant to promote their ships, and would argue with fellow fans just because they wanted to enjoy the show for what it was. After finally concluding Volume 5 and starting RWBY Chibi again, I'm happy to say that RWBY is still one of my favorite series to come back to, regardless of the feuding and mixed feelings among the fandom. As far as personal stories go, the only one I can recall was rather awkward for me, as it was when I was waiting in line for a RWBY panel last year, and two cosplayers were getting into a heated argument about a love triangle between John, Weiss, and Pyra. It ended up getting so heated that one of the two busted out their very own handwritten fanfiction. You really do have to wonder, was that person planning on getting into an argument just like that so they could finally have the opportunity to slam down that fanfiction all Ace Attorney style? But all jokes aside, it really is crazy how delusional these people can become to the point of grasping for anything to validate their ship. It really is pointless if you think about it. Well, before I go on to my outro, I must remind you all to vote in the iCard at the top right of the video for the next fandom that I should cover. To be honest, I kind of have an idea of what will win this one. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, do subscribe, and today's cool thing of the day is the manga of Junji Ito, more particularly Uzumaki. Since while reading creepypastas is great and all, Uzumaki is quite possibly my favorite horror-themed story that I've ever read. Not to mention, it's one of the most bizarre things you'll ever see, point blank. And hey, while you're at it, go ahead and read the rest of Junji Ito's works, or even watch the anime adapting some of them this season. Believe me, you will not regret it. So that being said, I'm the RPG Monger, and don't forget that each and every one of you are fantastic.